Okay. And everybody's in, Jason?
I'm including everyone right now.
Okay. Beautiful. Hello, welcome. Okay, we will get started. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. Welcome to CoachSource's First Friday webinar for April. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. And we offer, as always, a particularly warm welcome to our current clients as well as our not yet clients on the call. My name is Mary Dombrowski. I'm the SVP of Client Engagement with CoachSource, leading both our current client service teams as well as creating new client partnerships. For those of you not familiar with CoachSource, we are the largest pure-play global executive coaching firm. We have been in business for 19 years and have over 1,200 coaches globally that we deploy for leadership transformation, typically at the director level and above, including C-suite and board. And we host webinars such as this on the first Friday of every month. At CoachSource, we believe that inspiring leadership transforms organizations. Our monthly gatherings are dedicated to empowering HR business partners and leaders of talent inside organizations with insights, strategies, and expert guidance on leveraging executive coaching to drive organizational excellence. If you have any specific topics you would like to see us cover, feel free to email me at mary@coachsource.com. I would love to hear from you. So this month's First Friday, we are talking about one of the most frequently mentioned and often misunderstood leadership traits, executive presence. Executive presence consistently rates in the top 3 themes addressed in executive coaching engagements. That's because it's not just about polish or poise, it's about perception, influence, and the ability to lead with clarity, confidence, and conviction, especially when the stakes are high. People will often say, you know it when you see it, but what if you don't see it? What if your senior leader has all the right experience, the right ideas, even the right role, but they're not showing up in a way that inspires confidence, aligns stakeholders, or moves the business forward? So in this conversation, we'll go beyond the surface and explore why executive presence matters, what it looks like in action, and how executive coaching helps leaders develop executive presence in ways that drive measurable business impact. And I am very happy to say that we have the perfect guest, one of our amazing CoachSource qualified executive coaches, Joel Garfinkel, to lead our conversation on executive presence. Joel has been an executive coach with CoachSource for 14 years. He's the author of 11 books, including the #1 Amazon bestseller, Executive Presence, Step Into Your Power, Convey Confidence, and Lead with Conviction. He is a master certified coach and recognized as one of the top 50 executive coaches in America. His executive coaching and corporate training clients include Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Bank of America, Oracle, Deloitte, Ritz-Carlton, NBC, and the NBA. So I'm going to turn it over to Joel now, and we'll go until about 1:45 and open it up for Q&A. But you're also welcome to put your questions into the chat during the conversation. Okay, Joel, I will hand it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Looking forward to being with everyone today, and hopefully everyone can see my slide deck. So I just want to say first off that executive presence is often misunderstood. It's very true. It's I find one of the most critical intangible qualities in leadership development. It's an unspoken factor that shapes how leaders are perceived and followed. So a leader with executive presence is one that inspires confidence, credibility, and trust at every level in the organization. But there's many people who have a misunderstanding of exactly what it is. And so what I want to do is break down today what it is and explain more details about how you can leverage it and utilize it in your work environment. And most importantly, leverage executive coaching and CoachSource for the executive presence talent that they can bring into the organization. I want to start off with imagining a situation that many of you as HR and leadership development talent are in meetings where you're in a talent review meeting. And I want you to imagine you're in the talent review meeting. Maybe you've been in one this week or in the last month, and all the leaders are being discussed. And most of them come across as smart, talented, exceptional performers in their role. But at some point in the conversation, after discussing all the things they do well, eventually there's a but. So they're really talented, but something's not right. Something's missing. And oftentimes what's missing and that but that comes forward is executive presence. And so the statements you hear people say, and I'm going to share with you actual statements I've had clients say to me multiple times, many times, is things like this. They're technically competent, but they struggle to step up and take charge. And just see if you can relate to these. Excellent with customers and clients, but doesn't communicate clearly and succinctly with top leaders. Now, everything after the but in these examples I'm giving you are examples of leaders lacking executive presence. Third one, highly intelligent, but is rigid and hesitant when speaking. Knows the business inside and out, but isn't willing to take charge when decisions need to be made. Performs well, but lacks the confidence to lead decisively. So I'm sure that each one of these examples are just everything, again, after the but, are the ways they lack executive presence. And so when you as leaders throughout your company, you can think about who are the leaders inside my organization who fit these types of descriptions. Because each of these areas that they're lacking is really an example of ways that they can improve their executive presence. And I'm curious, I just want to open up the discussion, and maybe you can put it in the chat or you can actually raise your hand. But I wanted to know, what are some of the statements that you've heard when you hear someone lacks an executive presence? What kind of statements like this at talent review meetings or inside your organization do you hear when they say this person, this leader, they're lacking executive presence? What are the descriptions you receive beyond the 5 I shared here? And let me just see if you have anything in chat or you want to raise your hand to share any examples. And let's just see if we have any. And I can't see chat with my screen and how it's set up.
I'll take a look and see.
Okay, great.
So I haven't seen anything yet, but you're all welcome to pop into chat.
Here's the thing, and maybe you're a little shy so far in the beginning because it's only 8 o'clock on the West Coast, 11 o'clock on the East Coast, but many leaders inside your organization are struggling to step into more senior positions and be trusted with larger, more impactful responsibilities. And this doesn't happen because they're lacking in some of these executive presence areas that we're listing on this page. Now, besides these examples, there's one really large group of employees inside your organization that greatly benefit from an improved executive presence. And that's the untapped talent inside your company. Now, let's think about who are the untapped talent. It's the hidden leaders who, despite their capabilities and their competence, are often overlooked and underutilized. Every organization has untapped talent. And by that, I mean employees whose their presence isn't being felt despite their skill, their expertise, and their potential to lead. So think about your company for a moment. In every department, on every team, there's always highly capable employees who are flying under the radar. They aren't being seen, they're not being as heard or considered for stretch roles or promotions or high impact initiatives. And oftentimes what I see and notice, they're the quiet and introverted employees. And here's what I've seen over and over when coaching these type of individuals. They're often more confident than people think. Yeah, the quiet and introverted ones, when I work with them, they're much more confident than people project onto them because their quiet gets misinterpreted as a lack of confidence or authority. Two key ingredients of what makes a leader with executive presence. So what happens? So others are projecting onto them that they're not ready to lead, that they don't have what it takes. They don't have those qualities that are needed to step into a more visible role. Yet these are oftentimes your deep thinkers, your relationship builders, your steady leaders with high trust and high EQ. So what we want to do and what I find to be really effective and where I often focus on with leaders is how do I help these quiet achievers transform into confident, commanding leaders
Let me
without
ask,
changing who they are. Go ahead,
I
Mary.
just want to ask a question, Joel.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I would think one of the things we talked about when we were doing prep for this was, well, how do you identify those people, right? Like they're quiet and so they kind of fly under the radar. So how would you recommend how
I'm
people
gonna
would figure that out?
On my next slide,
Okay.
I'm gonna answer directly that question. So it's a great question, and I'm gonna address that. So
Okay.
give me,
And we
yeah.
and we did just get in chat a lack of self-awareness and flying off the handle or flying off at others in demanding situations. So we did get those two pieces.
And by the way, the second piece you just mentioned, that's the
Mhm.
type of leader that when I go over my model, you're going to see they are extreme executive presence in the sense that they are too dominant, too powerful, too commanding, in the way that they are too authoritative in such a way that they are disruptive in how they lead. And that's not as open-minded and inclusive as a leader. Now, some of those leaders do advance pretty high up in the organization and they're allowed to be in their role because the company's not holding them accountable. So things like that happen, and that's kind of the downside of a more extreme type of personality. Uh, I want to say this that when we think about so if how do we do that? How do we help the quiet achievers transform into more confident, commanding leaders? And so what we want to do is you want to provide them with assertiveness strategies so that they step forward, they're confidently claiming their space, ensuring they're seen, heard, and remembered. So here are some examples of techniques I've utilized with coaching clients who have been more on the quieted, introverted side, and we're trying to help them show up with a stronger, more powerful presence. Number one, speak up and be more vocal in meetings, helping them communicate with more clarity and conviction so that people really hear their presence when they're speaking, and assert themselves when they have a point of view and they have an opinion, they have something that they believe in, letting them come forward and really communicate that. And when they do, what happens is their presence, influence, and impact that skyrockets. And your organization starts leveraging the full potential of its people, the untapped talent that we're talking about. One example I want to give you is I work with a senior engineer who was consistently being passed over for team lead roles. And it wasn't due to lack of skill, but because her quiet presence in meetings led others to underestimate her leadership potential. And so together we focused on strengthening her key executive presence competencies. Three different areas we focused on. One was communication. She learned to contribute more strategically in meetings using concise language to make her points land with clarity. We worked on her confidence. So when she spoke, made sure she had deliberate, stronger, and more assured tone of voice, especially in high stake meetings with senior leaders. And the third one was influence. She began proactively engaging cross functional partners and asserting her perspective in decision making conversations. Within 6 months, she was leading a high visibility initiative and had earned very positive recognition from the senior leadership. Now, going back to what Mary talked about, there are some untapped talent questions I want to bring forward that I often hear when I'm working with organizations. And they often, one of the questions they always ask is, what percentage of employees would you say are untapped talent inside a company? And what's interesting with this answer, and this is just based on my research and based on working with lots of different organizations, is that if you ask the executive leadership team, they're going to estimate around 10% of their employees are untapped talent inside a company. What's fascinating is when you pose the same question to employees themselves, the ones who are actually experiencing this feeling, it jumps to about 40%. Because these are the individuals who feel overlooked, underutilized, and stagnant in their roles. And so the insight, and it's based on years of working with organizations, it's fascinating because 40% is a pretty high number. And so that means people are feeling disgruntled in some way and not satisfied and not as fulfilled. And so it's like that's the talent you want to make sure that you're in contact with. And so it leads us to the second piece, which is how do you identify this hidden talent? And one thing I found is that an exercise I've recommended and has worked quite well is having each senior leader in the organization take time to identify the quiet performers on their team and do this not just at the top levels, but several levels down. You want to bring to the surface the talent across the organization, not just those who are already visible, but you want to make sure that the ones who aren't visible, that these managers, they know their people well enough that they know how to identify the ones that maybe are being a bit hidden and they're not as being recognized and they are the more quiet performers. And it's also important to realize that you want to identify the ones who are flying under the radar because these are the ones that we kind of ignore. The high potentials who stand out, that's easy. That's right in front of you. And it's also important to note that the untapped talent isn't just limited to introverts. I also want you to be aware of the type of leaders I see who are untapped talent are the high potential employees who aren't being challenged. And if they're not being challenged, sometimes they can just hang out and not be challenged and not really ask for more. How do you identify that and help them be more challenged? Or the talented team members who are stuck in roles that don't stretch them, or employees who are being overlooked because they don't self-promote. They don't do a good job making themselves as visible of their impact and value they bring to the organization. Or the leaders whose style doesn't match the current leadership mold or model. And so their impact is maybe not as well known. So before I go to my next kind of key point and transition into a new concept and topic, I just want to see, is there any questions or comments anyone has on what we've shared so far? And you either can raise your hand or you can make a comment in chat. I just want to see if anyone has any questions or comments on what I've shared so far.
I was
And if,
muted. One person
okay,
made a comment going back
yeah.
to when we're, looking at the question posed previously and said a tenured operations manager who understands every process but defers to others during crises causing delays and not making decisions.
And that the challenge you have with that one is you don't realize this person doesn't have the right leadership abilities in the moment of a crisis, but the crisis sometimes determines how effective is a leader and how do they show up in that moment of time. And it's important because in those crisis and challenges and stressful environments and intense environments, they happen in the workplace. And so some leaders will defer too often and not take ownership. And that's lacking executive presence because one of the key components is someone who can take charge, someone who is willing to take ownership versus deferring too often to others makes it seem like as someone who's evaluating talent, you're looking at that leader and saying, I don't know if they have what it takes to lead at the level that we need them to thrive at. So you can see what your example is a really good one. So now I'm going to move into my next point I want to make. So in addition to elevating your untapped talent, one of the most strategic benefits of developing a strong executive presence is that it prepares your next level leaders. When leaders show up with clarity, confidence, and the ability to influence, they're not just advancing themselves, they're actually modeling what effective leadership looks like for the next generation. And that's huge because when you model that, then the next generation knows what it looks like to be a leader with a strong executive presence and have the certain qualities and competencies that you want to see. There was a statistic I like to share that when 400 CEOs were asked how they choose next level leaders, 89% of them said they look for one critical trait, and that's executive presence. As your leaders in your organization rise up, their executive presence must keep pace with their growth. The higher the stakes, the more you need power and presence. I know you know this to be true, that as leaders rise up and they're more in senior level environments, and they have more demands being placed on them, they need more power and presence. So developing an executive presence is essential because it creates a strong leadership pipeline of prepared leaders ready to step into bigger roles. There's nothing more frustrating than having a leader not be ready to step into that bigger role. Because when they lack executive presence, their career progress stalls, but they also create a leadership bottleneck, a situation where people can't move up because they're not perceived as promotable. So it slows the entire organization down. And I'm sure many of you have seen situations like this. And this work of building executive presence isn't a one-time achievement. It's meant to grow with every promotion. That's the thing that's fascinating in my observation of seeing is that leaders rise to each new level. They're stepping into unfamiliar territory. And what happens is they have new expectations, new stakeholders, and a shift at what's required to lead effectively at that new level. So in their new roles, confidence can drop temporarily because they're no longer operating from a place of mastery. In their prior role, they have mastery. They have a level of competence. They're feeling great. They're feeling on top of their game. And then they get into a new role and they're like, oh my God, wait a minute. I'm not as skilled or talented as competent. I might have imposter syndrome. I might be in environments where I'm more intimidated and scared of the high level leaders I might be interacting with. That transitionary phase sometimes drops the leader's confidence and they have to refocus on their executive presence, refocus on gaining trust, showing authority, communicating with clarity all over again to establish us with a new audience and a new role. And there's also a retention risk. So if a leader doesn't continue developing themselves, improving their executive presence, high potential employees beneath them may lead to find growth elsewhere. They want to see their leaders, the managers above them, continuing growing, developing, and improving. And the other thing I want to say is that when leaders are stuck and they're not developing and growing and improving their executive presence, teams feel it. Motivation drops, engagement suffers, people stop looking up for guidance and inspiration. So I now want to take a moment here and we're going to dive into executive presence. And what exactly is executive presence? I want to share with you an interesting pattern and observation. 90% of the people I coach on executive presence, they come to me because they receive feedback that they need to improve their executive presence. And then the first question I always ask them is, what exactly did your manager or whoever told you you need to improve your executive, what exactly did they say? What exactly did they say you need to develop? And I get that same answer over and over again. They say, I don't know. They weren't clear. They were quite vague. And they said, they just told me I need to work on executive presence. And I tried to get specifics and they weren't clear with me. And it's so frustrating. I've even had clients say that managers, I've heard this multiple times, say to the leader, I'll know it when I see it. How is that helpful? I'll know it when I see it. That's great. You'll know it when you see it, but I have no idea still what it is. That's unfair. Someone's career growth, promotional opportunities, impact to provide more value in the organization is being undermined because they just have a catch-all statement to mean what executive presence is. I did a survey with 150 leaders asking them to define executive presence, and they came back with 75 different attributes. So I lead that in to say, let's define executive presence. Let me share with you what it is. It comes down to three core domains. So what is executive presence? It comes down to three core domains. Number one, you got to radiate gravitas. Two, you got to act with authority. And three, you got to express yourself fully. To be a leader with executive presence, you must do these three things. I spent 15 years studying executive presence, gleaned from working with over 1,400 executive coaching clients and 7,500 workshop participants. I conducted research and narrowed down to a 3x3 model of 9 competencies, which now I'm about to go over with you. This is what executive presence is. 3 different columns. Gravitas, you got confidence, commanding, charismatic. Under authority, you got being decisive, bold, and influential. And under expression, you got vocal, insightful, and clear. This is the model. And it's a very simple model because in some ways you can take this and I can hand this to a leader and say, what do you think your top two areas of improvement need to be in executive presence? And what are the top two ones that you do most well? And people within seconds can come to it. So it's a really effective tool to help identify what it is. So now I'm going to go over all 9 of these briefly with you so you have context to what it is. Now, first, we're going to talk about the gravitas section. So if employees are going to have impact on their jobs and be an effective leader, they need to show up as confident, commanding, and charismatic. Example of gravitas. You're in a cross-functional meeting where a senior director is asked to weigh in on complex decisions. Instead of deferring or over-explaining, she pauses, speaks with clarity and confidence, and offers a clear recommendation. She takes charge at the next steps needed to move this forward and be the point person. You can feel her gravitas. There's strength in her clarity and her conviction behind her ownership and her direction. People walk away with a sense of clarity and confidence that she knows what needs to happen, what needs to be done. That's an aspect of gravitas. Now, the first one, confidence. And as HR leaders and leadership development leaders inside organizations, you see these things happen. When I go over these characteristics, these competencies, think about leaders in your company that come to mind. So the confidence piece, you lack confidence, you might be second guessing yourself, you're hesitant to share ideas with senior stakeholders. So when a leader comes from a place of confidence, what ends up happening is they speak up, they advocate for their ideas, they begin influencing others more consistently. They show up as someone others trust to lead in these critical moments. That's confidence. Commanding, the next one, commanding. If you're not commanding, if you lack it, you're going to defer to others. You're going to wait to be told what to do. You avoid having to make high stakes decisions. This is someone who lacks commanding. Others don't see them as ready to step up or take the lead at the next level that they need to. What a commanding leader does is they are proactive and assertive. They step in, they take ownership, they move things forward. So they're the ones others naturally turn to in moments of uncertainty and change. They have that. Now let's look at the third one under gravitas, charismatic. Now, charisma, it's the one people think I most don't have. Oh yeah, it's the one it's the people in marketing and sales. It's the CEO. It's the big personalities. But if you broke charismatic down to its subpoints, it's really about energy and enthusiasm. So moving from a flat, uninspiring individual to bringing more energy and enthusiasm to their messaging, that's important. And every leader I coach, especially ones who lack this, they can gain it. People all around them want to be inspired and invigorated. And once they realize that, they start to lean in and say, hey, can I bring more energy and enthusiasm to my situations, to my moments, to my meetings, to my interactions with others? And they're like, yeah, I can do that. Great. Then you're bringing some charisma forward. So that, as an entity, gravitas, confident, commanding, charismatic. Now let's go into the next one, authority. So you're having a better sense of what executive presence is as I break these down. If you look, and let's describe what authority is, what I mean by that. If you look at the most effective leaders, they're most likely decisive, bold, and influential. And when you do these 3 competencies well, you're given more authority. You're seen as more of an authority. You're given more responsibility because you're seen as someone who makes things happen. An example for this one, a VP was leading a cross-functional project that has stalled. And too many options, no clear direction, and missed deadlines were occurring. So instead of waiting for consensus, she took charge. She called a meeting, outlined the core issues, and proposed a new plan. She was decisive, offering a clear path forward with ownership and urgency. She was bold, willing to challenge and long-held assumptions and express her position with confidence. And she was influential, able to get buy-in, not through force, but by building trust and uniting the group behind a new plan. So that's kind of an essence of what authority is about, what I mean by that. Now, decisive. Decisive is so important. The thing you often see is when a leader lacks executive presence, it's because they're indecisive, they're hesitant, they overanalyze, they delay decisions. And what's the downside of that? It creates bottlenecks, frustrates teams, erodes confidence in that person's ability to lead when they are projected as being indecisive. So when they're decisive, they act with conviction and move things forward. They inspire trust. Now let's look at the next one. Besides being decisive, you want to be bold. So what you don't need is leaders playing it so safe. Avoid taking strong positions because they're hesitant to speak up in high stakes conversations, or they defer to others to avoid conflict. That's not being bold. You want leaders who are a bold leader takes a stand. They express their ideas clearly. They challenge assumptions. They're willing to push back when needed. They lead from the front. That takes boldness. That's what they're able to do. And the last one is influential. So leaders who struggle with influence, their communication lacks persuasion. So you get to a place in an organization where you recognize how much leading with influence is so important because you want to build alignment and drive action. Because a leader who communicates with influence, they move people towards a direction. They create compelling arguments that persuade people towards a point of view. So they don't just share ideas, they drive action, commitment, and change inside an organization. So those are the three under authority. And the last column, expression. So this is all about expressing yourself, being vocal, speaking up, sharing your thought and ideas. And when you do, make sure they're insightful and make sure you're being clear. Those are the three. With the vocal piece, I have to tell you, this is one that I've seen organizations have requested their employees throughout the organization. When they really look at it, they realize how when my employees aren't being vocal, it's undermining the organization because we're not having their insights and their thoughts and their wisdom and their knowledge being expressed. And there's a study I found that 17% of employees don't speak up at all. Imagine how many employees fit this description in your organization, where maybe they don't speak up at all, or maybe they rarely speak up, and they lack of speaking up. It really impacts your company because the company, you end up losing the knowledge, the insights, the information of every leader who remains quiet. So what I found when I think about this model, and I've worked on it with organizations and in one-on-one coaching, the key thing I've seen is that being vocal is actually much more important than people realize. It's vital that every single meeting, all your employees are participating actively in a discussion. And the one thing I always tell my leaders, I say every meeting you go to, the one statement you want to tell yourself is, what can I contribute at this meeting? Not, should I contribute? Maybe I shouldn't. It's, what can I contribute? I'm going to contribute every meeting. What's it going to be? The company, as an organization, you need your employees to voice their opinions. This is how they add value. And this is what executive presence is about. Your presence needs to be felt. And when you are vocal, that moves us to the second point, insightful. You want to make sure that you're having thoughtful recommendations. You ask smart, strategic questions. You share ideas that demonstrate critical thinking. So their presence, your presence when it's there, you're not just there to say a question, you're there to elevate the conversation. And then people begin to rely on you and your perspective. And then the last one around clarity, the third one there under expression. The same quality that makes you really good with insightful sometimes can undermine the clarity, because a lot of times I'm working with leaders, and I'm sure many of them inside organization, they're the ones who are, they have a subject matter expertise, a deep knowledge in a certain area. And what happens is they take that incredibly insight of knowledge and they start to over explain, go way into the details, way too much into the specificness of their knowledge. And what happens is they over explain. They share too much data, go off on tangents. They lose their audience. They come across as unfocused and unclear. So that's why this clear one can be really important, because a clear leader gets right to the point. They communicate with structure, brevity, and purpose, making it easily for others to understand their message and act on it. And I'm sure many of you have seen leaders inside the organization you can be projected on as lacking executive presence because you're not sure how to be clear and be crisp and have brevity, so the point you're trying to make is clearly understood. So when you look at all 9 of these qualities, what you have to realize is that the leaders who are chosen for next level roles consistently demonstrate a strong degree of these competencies. So when promotion discussions happen, those who are passed over are often seen as lacking in several of these areas, and they're viewed as not ready for higher level leadership. So this is how you build a leadership pipeline. You develop future ready leaders who show up with the clarity, the confidence, and the presence. And for some people, you look at this model, sometimes you need to dial it up because you need more of these. Some people you need to dial it down because they are too vocal. They dominate meetings. They don't let anyone else get a word in, or they're too confident, too commanding, and they're arrogant. So there's ways in which you might have to dial this down for some, and a lot of them you need to dial this up. And each one of these competencies, people are going to flex them based on different situations. But generally, you can look at all 9 of these and see, how do I show up with this? So before I'm going to share the next thing I wanted to share, I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions or comments. Do you want to raise your hand? You want to any comments and questions you have regarding this model? I'm sure it triggered a lot of thoughts about leaders inside your company who are fitting this model, and you're like, hey, they could really use some of these competencies. So let's hear from you any thoughts or questions you have based on what we shared so far.
So one question is, can someone lack one pillar of the model and still have strong executive presence, and why or why not?
Yeah, absolutely. You could lack, I mean, for example, you could be not very decisive, but you could be really vocal. So I mean, there's ways in which that you could be vocal and insightful and share a lot, but sometimes you realize you're not very influential. You're not able to persuade people and really move them towards a point of view. Or sometimes you're bold, but you realize that in your boldness, you lack charisma. So you're not able to maybe bring people towards your point of view, but your boldness is there. The other thing I was going to say is sometimes you work on one area, it actually improves another area. So you start being bold and then people project onto you, you're more confident. Or you start being more decisive and they notice, you're really decisive, you're really clear, you really have conviction behind your ideas, you're going to come across as more commanding. So these can interrelate with each other and how they work. Any other questions or thoughts?
Another question came in just as a clarification of, is there a difference between leadership presence and executive presence, or are those interchangeable terms?
So what I would say about that, and I also have sometimes said this, and I just didn't say it to this group, people sometimes get hung up in the word executive. And so I've heard people say to me like, Joel, I'm not an executive, so can I still work on executive presence? And executive presence is a concept. It's an idea. It's not, don't take the word executive literally. And if it trips you up, bring in a leadership, because leadership presence and executive presence to me is the same thing. So bring in leadership. You even could say professional presence. And the key component of it is presence. But yeah, if you want to do leadership or executive, that's fine. The whole idea is taking the concepts and the competencies we're talking about here and really utilize them and making sure your leaders are doing a good job of showing up with this. Because you'll notice, if you looked at the last 10 people who got promoted in your organization and you evaluated how many of these qualities they have, I'm pretty confident they're going to have a lot of these qualities and do them quite well.
There's one other comment that was made earlier about bias on women in high leadership potential versus men based on studies. Women very results oriented may be seen as uncaring versus men.
Um, it's interesting. I've seen the opposite, that women tend to come across as more caring than men, as a common attribute. But I can't, I wouldn't be able to really speak to what the question is there. Yeah.
Okay. And one last, how do you approach the overconfident leader?
It's a very good question. And the challenge you have with an overconfident leader from someone who's been coaching for 25 years is they're not coachable. The overconfident leader often has an ego, and that ego gets in the way of them being open to feedback, guidance, direction, anything that's going to be about, because if they're overconfident and you're saying, okay, they need some feedback to recognize their overconfidence isn't working well in this organization or with their team, and here's some of the downside of what's happening. The challenge you have is them being open to the feedback and being willing to hear it. And oftentimes their overconfidence gets in the way. But what I found to be effective is to set up a coaching engagement where you do 360 feedback and you really get a very, very complete and comprehensive 20-page report type feedback, and let that be the foundation of the feedback. And I found that leaders who are overconfident and they get a feedback report that shares information that's different than that end up realizing, they wake up to the fact that, oh, there's some feedback about me that I didn't realize, and it's coming from many different people below, peers, and above. And then all of a sudden, it's kind of a wake-up call for them. And so you know, engaging, you know, CoachSource on a coaching engagement where you're doing a 6-month engagement, you do the 360, and then you have the coach work with them based on the 360 feedback that they got. And then all of a sudden, a coach, individual who's more confident is actually having some humility and some understanding of how they can dial down the confidence in such a way that's not undermining others and undermining their effectiveness. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next point I want to bring up. So now that what I want to know, and I want you to think about this, when the company, what does the company benefit from if a company had a large population of leaders who have a strong executive presence? How does that benefit the company? And I want you to think about this, and you even could put these in the chat as I go over some examples. But what are the company benefits from having a strong executive presence? And I recommend putting some of your answers that come to mind right now in the chat. And as you do, I'll go over some of my examples here. So one is, when you have a larger organization, when you have a lot of employees in your organization who are elevating their executive presence, you have a higher leadership readiness, and succession planning starts being improved upon, because developing an executive presence in your high potential leaders, that strengthens your succession pipeline. Leaders who project confidence, communicate with clarity, and influence at the highest level, they're seen as ready for the senior roles. So it's really an effective way to make sure that your leaders are ready for that next level. Another benefit to having a strong executive presence is improved decision-making and speed. So leaders with executive presence, they're quicker and more confident in the decisions that need to be made. They don't delay decision-making, which can create a bottleneck in moving things forward. And that leads to faster problem solving and a smoother execution. Another area is enhanced team alignment and performance. So strong executive presence, that improves a leader's ability to motivate and engage teams, because they're more charismatic, and they result in improved collaboration and higher productivity across departments. So it improves team performance when you have a leader with executive presence. People are looking up to them, they're valuing them, they feel like there's clear direction, there's confidence behind what they're saying and what they're doing. The other area is improve C-suite and board communication. So when they have to communicate at senior level meetings, coaching on their executive presence helps communicate and present more effectively with top executives, because they come across not just being more vocal and clear and concise and to the point, they come across as more confident, more commanding. So they come across as like, I know what I'm doing. I deserve to have a seat at this table and be speaking to this group. And so that ensures alignment on priorities, smoother decision making, and it really sets you up that people are perceiving you as someone who deserves to be there in that environment. And the last one is increased employee engagement and retention. Now, what this is about is leaders who project confidence, a core aspect of executive presence, that inspires trust and loyalty. I know that you know what you're doing. And so that encourages and really helps employee engagement, reduces turnover, strengthens overall talent pipeline. You want to work for leaders who are confident, know what they're doing, and you feel like you can learn from them and grow from them, and they are someone you can lean into, even from a mentoring perspective. So let me just see if there's any questions or any comments in what you said about other examples. You know, what have you seen in your roles inside companies? How would your company benefit from a stronger executive presence? What kind of impact would it have besides some of the ones I've shared?
Surprisingly, we haven't gotten comments in the chat around how this is impacting companies and you know, the benefits as you're pointing them out.
Okay.
But I think, you know, one of the things that that we also had talked about was in terms of you know, gaining stakeholder alignment, driving cross-functional execution, and other, you know, is another area, another
Yes,
benefit that comes
that's
through with
true.
that.
It is definitely. It's really about looking at your leaders and realizing, do, the company benefits when they have leaders with a strong executive presence because these leaders are the ones who are driving the organization forward. They're the ones who are going to take on the projects and really have ownership. And you need leaders like that. And yes, you also need followers. And you want people to come behind and be the ones who get the work done and do good work. But we're talking about impactful leaders who can really make a difference to your company. And at this time in your organization, you want leaders to have the strengths that they have and really show up with their presence being felt. We don't want them to hold back. We don't want them to be held back in any way. And so that's important. I want to share with you on the next slide. Go ahead, Mary.
Very
Yeah,
quickly, Joel. Julie has a great point about
yeah,
that, it's hard for organizations to think about how to quantify this. And I know it comes up a lot of how do you quantify the benefits of executive coaching and of having increased executive presence. But in reality, things like retention can certainly be quantified and go back to a number, productivity of a team, reaching goals, whether that's a revenue goal or a timeline goal or a cost-cutting goal. Those are things that you can actually measure. And I don't know if you have anything more to add to that, but we feel like we need to look up front at what are some of the metrics that we want to measure so that we then can measure, like build that into the engagements, whether that's the competence and leadership pillars or actual like revenue productivity, cost cutting goals, et cetera.
it's good. It's a very good point. Yeah, that's great. So I wanted to bring up organizational challenges and business inflection points that would greatly benefit from a leader having a strong executive presence. So what are some circumstances or situations that might occur? And so let's look at that. And again, if you think of some ideas and you want to share them in chat, please do. This is the last slide I have, so we can do a Q&A after this. And I want to really encourage that you raise your hand or you share something in chat. I mean, this is an opportunity to speak to someone like myself who has executive presence knowledge, and you have an opportunity to really learn or get your questions asked to really help your organization develop and improve your leaders. So some of the challenges and business inflection points, one is leadership transitions. So any leadership transitions that are occurring in your organization are really ripe for improving executive presence. So when a new leader steps into a critical role, particularly at the C-suite or senior levels, strong executive presence is really needed because they have to inspire confidence, align teams, ensure smooth transitions. And when they have a strong executive presence, when they are coming across with confidence, command, charismatic nature, and they're really decisive, bold, and influential, their leaders, their organization that they're running at this new level, it impacts them. They recognize that this leader knows what they're doing. They're able to have conviction behind their leadership. They step into their power. They're really strong in what they know and who they are. You need that. And when you don't have that and that's lacking, you can see how much concern and issues get unraveled. Morale gets impacted. Sense of direction gets impacted. Ability to make decisions gets impacted. So speaking of decisions, another area is when you have high impact decision making. So when the company is faced with challenging, complex decisions, maybe you're entering a new market or you're changing the culture in your organization, either because it's changing itself or it's being changed by you intentionally. Or maybe you're making major investments in a new direction, or there's a strategic direction or change that's pivoting. As we know, I don't want to make, I don't want to, but I'm going to say it, but like the whole tariff, I mean, every company I'm talking to is being impacted by the tariffs in some way or another, and they're having to respond to it. That's a major impact of complex decision making that comes from situations like that. So strong executive presence ensures your leaders can make bold, confident decisions, communicate them effectively, inspire alignment. Another area is rapid growth or scaling. So as organizations expand quickly, leaders must establish some sense of authority, set a clear direction, ensure their teams are staying aligned. So executive presence helps leaders communicate effectively across departments because when they're clear and they're not rambling on and going off on tangents, when they're clear, when they're concise, when they're really able to communicate with a sense of conviction behind their ideas, people believe what they're saying, they hear what they're saying, and they can lean into that confidence. So this is the last slide I wanted to share. Next step would be for us to look at what questions you have about executive presence, what questions you have about bringing coaching in as a key component to helping your organization and help with the leadership development of your employees. Let's see what questions or comments anyone has. You can either raise your hand or you can put your question in chat.
And while we're waiting for questions to come in, Joel, I just want to mention to everybody that we do have our next First Friday in Friday, May 2nd at 11 a.m. Eastern. We're covering different topics that are coming up, different themes from executive coaching, and we want to bring our coach expertise to you. So the next one will probably be around communication skills or influencing others, because that's the other two topics that come up all the time. And of course, if you ever want to have a conversation with CoachSource as a thought leader, strategic partner in how executive coaching can support your leaders, you are welcome to reach out to your client service director if you're a current client, or you're welcome to reach out to me, Mary at CoachSource.com, if you are a not yet client. So one question that came in, Joel, is apart from coaching, what other types of development may be effective for executive presence?
So I found that oftentimes I'm, is doing a corporate training where I've done, executive presence for entire organizations, entire companies, where they want the entire company to get this mindset and utilize it and make sure it's being utilized. I've had it for entire departments where I've done training where I come in and really speak to about the executive presence. So besides executive coaching and doing that, there's the training coming in and doing workshops, and then there's also group coaching, which Mary, you may want to speak to that, but group coaching is another medium where you come together and you can have the executive presence as a dominant theme to be utilized.
Yeah, we were talking about this previously, that this does lend itself toward having leaders at the same level going through a program together, which kind of increases the cohesion of the group, but it also can tie into the organizational values and the leadership competencies of that. And so it's a combination of some training, some group meetings, and also the skills building and doing experiential exercises as part of that. But typically we would see for something like executive presence that it would be leaders at the same level that would go through this experience. You can imagine like your directors who are on track to become VP, or VP on track to go higher, as the types of individuals that you could put through a program such as that in a group setting.
Right.
Okay. That's good, because I was going to bring that up as well. Okay. And look, why don't we talk about, being in like high pressure, high growth environments? How would a lack of executive presence impact the team dynamics or business momentum?
With high pressure and high growth, what can happen is people revert back to habits that may not be most effective. They can be more reactive because of the pressure they're feeling. And what happens is in that reactiveness, they end up being ineffective. And so a lot of the habits they have that may not have been as effective or beneficial sometimes get in the way. And so you think about these executive presence model and some of these competencies, it takes intentionality to develop them. And so if you're in a high pressure situation, you might, in the high pressure situation, in a high growth situation, not have as much confidence because you're unsure of yourself and you're scared, or you're not sure about what's the best decision to make. And the pressure kind of gets to you and you struggle having some of these competencies. So I find that to work on these competencies before you're in a high pressure situation so that you have them as a foundation helps you. So when you get to the high pressure situation, you're doing what it takes behind the scenes to be the confident leader who can take charge during these moments when they need a leader to take charge. Because if no one takes charge and it's leaderless, then people aren't sure what to do, and then decisions don't get made, and then the organization struggles. And so it's really important to work on these when the high pressure situations aren't occurring, and that you can build this foundation as a place of strength for yourself. Because even the vocal one, you're in a high pressure situation, you need to be vocal, you need to take the lead, and you need to be clear. But instead, you're not as vocal because you're scared, you're concerned, you're afraid to be bold. So a lot of these qualities can be hindered in a high pressure situation where you kind of hold back your leadership abilities.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So, I don't see any other questions in the chat
Okay.
right now, Joel. So I think, we're almost at the top of the hour, but what a fantastic presentation, and
Right.
really insightful, and I think really helpful to take something people hear all the time and really break it down to be able to put it to tangible components and be able to recognize it, so that it isn't just I'll know it when I see it, but
Right.
do I actually see these specific things? So you're getting a lot of love in the chat for the model. That
good.
it's really very helpful for people. And we will send this replay out to everybody. It will also be on our website at coachsource.com. And thank you so much for being here today. Joel, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
sharing your amazing insights into this topic. And we will see everybody in May.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.